The Committee on Homeland Security will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that Mr. Caston be permitted to participate in today's hearing without objections. Good morning. Let me apologize for my accent. I am from Mississippi. It gives everybody consternation because they say I haven't heard somebody talk like that in a long time. So trust me, the speed of my voice has nothing to do with my brain. I am absolutely proud to be here. As I said to Congresswoman Underwood earlier, I spent the summers of my college education in Chicago, Illinois, working because that's how I was able to finance my college education in Mississippi because Illinois paid far better wages than Mississippi. So I come back and I thank you for making me what I am today because of your generosity. But I also like to thank Chairman, Vice Chair Underwood for inviting committee members to Illinois to hear state and local perspectives on election security. Since she arrived in Congress in January, the Vice Chair has demonstrated a strong commitment to raising the bar on federal efforts to improve election security at the state and local level. Too often, well-intentioned officials in Washington do not have a complete understanding of how the federal government can best assist state and local officials in their mission. But Ms. Underwood has fought to make sure that the boots on the ground have the resources they need and a seat at the table, which is why we are having this field hearing today. The Vice Chair has been a valued leader on the Homeland Security Committee. And on election security in particular, I want to thank her for her continued efforts to hold the folks in Washington accountable on behalf of her constituents. Election security requires a whole of government approach, federal, state, and local effort to protect America's elections. It is a national security issue that transcends party politics and reaches into the heart of our democracy. As we approach the 2020 elections, it is critical that we work together to protect democracy's most sacred tradition, free and fair elections. Last Congress, I co-chaired the Congressional Task Force on Election Security and met with election security experts, state election officials, and national security experts to assess vulnerabilities in election infrastructure and determine how to address them. The task force published a report in February 2018 that included 10 recommendations and introduced legislation to implement them. That legislation, Election Security Act, was included in H.R. 1, the For the People Act, which passed the House in March of this year. Unfortunately, the Senate has yet to act on that or any other meaningful election security legislation. Nevertheless, since 2016, progress has been made toward more secure elections at state and local level. The Department of Homeland Security and Election Assistance Commission have built stronger, more effective partnerships with state and local officials. States like Illinois are at the forefront of that effort and have led the way. From improvements in the Illinois Sentry Network to the Cyber Navigator program, the state has made smart investments in election security capabilities that makes it harder for adversaries to meddle in the 2020 elections. But continued election security efforts cost money, and I imagine that state and local election officials here struggle with the same budget demands as their counterparts do in my district in Mississippi. That is why I'm glad to be here today, to learn from all of you what you need from us to help you continue the important work you do to secure elections. The federal government, especially Congress, must understand the resource constraints of local election officials and partner with them to address vulnerabilities to election infrastructure through grants and services. Local election officials are on the front line of securing our elections, and your success depends on the resources and support you receive from federal and state government. The intelligence community has made clear the threats to our elections persist. Acting Director of National Intelligence, Joseph McGuire, told Congress that we should expect adversaries and strategic competitors to refine their capabilities and add new tactics as they learn from each other's experiences in advance of the 2020 elections. I look forward to hearing from our panel of witnesses today about how Illinois is leading the way in securing their election critical infrastructure and how Congress and federal agencies can support these efforts to further strengthen our elections and protect them from another attack. Before I close, I'd like to thank the good people of Gurnee Village Hall for hosting today's hearing. With that, I yield back the balance of my time, and I now recognize the Vice Chair of the full committee, the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Underwood, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. As Vice Chair of the House Committee on Homeland Security, I am so thrilled that you joined us as we gavel in this committee's first ever hearing in the Illinois 14th Congressional District. I would like to also thank the Village of Gurnee for hosting the committee's hearing today and my colleague, Congressman Casten, for taking part in the hearing. Thank you. I would also like to thank Chairman Thompson for holding this hearing and joining us all the way from Mississippi. And thank you to the panel of experts and public servants assembled here today. I appreciate the important work that you do, and I look forward to hearing from each of you. I would also like to acknowledge the members of our community who have made time to join us for this important conversation. And an extra special thank you to Mr. Jacob Carlson and his AP Government students that are here from Zion Benton Township High School. Thank you for being here today. In February of this past year, this committee, led by Chairman Thompson, held its first hearing of the 116th Congress on defending our democracy by protecting and securing our nation's elections. U.S. intelligence officials have confirmed that there was foreign interference in the 2016 elections. In Illinois, this resulted in foreign actors accessing the records of 76,000 Illinois voters. Since then, state and local election officials have been working hard to improve election systems and infrastructure, but due to limited resources, some have faced challenges to upgrading legacy machines and bringing on additional cybersecurity personnel. Congress has recognized the challenges that come with improving decades-old infrastructure and has provided critical funding and assistance to states since our state was hacked in 2016. Here in Illinois, state and local election officials have worked together to implement a world-class Cyber Navigator program to help the state improve its cybersecurity posture and to mitigate future attacks. This program has allowed our state to hire additional cybersecurity personnel to facilitate information sharing and provide guidance on best practices to each of the 108 election authorities in Illinois. The Cyber Navigator program is a valuable tool for the election officials here in Illinois, and it's my hope that programs such as this can serve as models for other states. In addition to the funding provided by Congress, this committee has made election security a priority and has put forward tough, broad policies to secure our elections. I'm proud that these policies were included in H.R. 1, the For the People Act, which we passed in the House in March. This is an important package of reforms because it seeks to restore integrity in our government and ensure that each and every American can fully participate in our democracy. Specifically, it helps protect U.S. elections by improving voting system security, by requiring the Department of Homeland Security to maintain election systems as critical infrastructure. It also requires regular testing of voting systems and provides much-needed resources for states to conduct post-election audits and upgrade legacy election systems. I was also proud to support the fiscal year 2020 House Appropriations Package, which included $600 million for the Election Assistance Commission to to distribute election security grants to bolster state election security efforts. These two House-passed measures go a long way to help districts like this one, which is operating under constrained budgets while trying to do the absolute most to ensure the integrity of our elections. Now, the 2020 election is right around the corner, and adversaries are already working to interfere. We don't have time to wait. The Senate should immediately pass legislation to strengthen our election security. As the chairman stated in our previous Election Security Committee hearing, we have made great strides since 2016, but we must remain vigilant against bad actors working to undermine the beacon of American democracy. I hope our discussion today will provide this committee and the public with valuable information and resources and assistance in preparation for the upcoming elections in 2020. The integrity of our elections is essential to the preservation of our republic, and it's our patriotic duty as Americans and my sacred duty as someone elected to represent this beautiful community, the Illinois 14th, to ensure that our elections are free from foreign interference. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today on the progress that has been made here in Illinois, what additional work we can do to support our state and local election officials, and how we can help other states use Illinois' success as a model for their own programs. Thank you again for being here today. I'm looking forward to an educational and productive hearing, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman. Other members of the committee are reminded that under the committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. I'd like to extend a welcome to our witnesses. Mr. Matthew Matheson is a senior advisor on election security at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at the Department of Homeland Security, commonly referred to as CISA. Prior to that, he served as chairman of the Election Assistance Commission. Mr. Steve Sanvoss, executive director of the Illinois Board of Elections. Mr. Sanvoss previously served as the Board of Elections General Counsel and has worked for the State Board of Elections for over 30 years. Congratulations. Miss Robin O'Connor is a clerk for Lake County, Illinois. Ms. O'Connor has been in public service for nearly 13 years. Thank you. Finally, Ms. Elizabeth Howard is counsel for the Brennan Center for Justice's Democracy Program. Ms. Howard focuses her work on cybersecurity and elections. Prior to that, Ms. Howard served as Deputy Commissioner for the Virginia Department of Elections. Without objections, the witness's full statement will be inserted in the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his or her statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Mr. Matheson.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson, Vice Chair Underwood, Congressman Caston. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to testify regarding the Department of Homeland Security's efforts to help secure our election infrastructure in Illinois and across this country. My name is Matt Masterson. I'm the Election Security Lead for DHS, and I'm the previous chair of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, as well as an election official in the state of Ohio. The Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, has a strong relationship with state and local officials in Illinois. The department regularly engages with Illinois State Election Task Force on training, assessment requests, and information sharing. And today I want to commend the 108 Illinois election districts and the state of Illinois for becoming members of the Election Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or EIISAC. In doing so, all election districts in Illinois are part of a robust community sharing actionable information and valuable alerts and warnings. I also want to commend Illinois' successful Cyber Navigator program that has been mentioned, which is truly a model for the rest of the country to follow. Our progress in working with Illinois is reflective of our progress with the election community across the country. CISA's mission is clear: to support election officials and their private sector partners to identify and manage risks to their systems, help them manage response within the existing Constitution and election traditions. Elections are run at the state and local level by dedicated professionals across America's more than 8,800 election jurisdictions, but those officials shouldn't have to defend themselves from sophisticated and persistent threats on their own. Since 2016, we at CISA have learned a lot. Over the last 2 years, we've worked tirelessly to strengthen our partnership with the election community. For the 2020 election, we are already providing voluntary resources and services to all 50 states, over 2,000 local jurisdictions, 6 election associations, and 12 election vendors. Our approach is threefold. 1, making sure the election community has the information they need to defend their systems. 2, making sure they have the technical support and tools they need to manage risks to their systems. And 3, building enduring partnerships to advance security efforts together. CISA is focused on building scalable, repeatable mechanisms to dramatically grow our information sharing capabilities. We share contextualized threat intelligence and actionable information through the ISAC with our close partners in the intelligence community and law enforcement and private sector. More importantly, state and local officials across the country are sharing what they're seeing on their networks and on their systems with us. We've deployed intrusion detection capabilities, or Albert sensors, to provide real-time detection capabilities of malicious activity on election infrastructure across all 50 states. Secondly, we provide technical support and services to election officials and their vendors. Initially, we offered the standard services, including vulnerability assessments, that we offer to other federal agencies and critical infrastructure partners. As we refined our understanding of election officials' requirements, we shifted capabilities that are quicker, less intrusive, and can scale to more jurisdictions. For instance, in 2018 and in 2019, we deployed a remote penetration testing capability, thanks in part to the funding that Congress provided to us, to allow for remote penetration of election systems, allowing us to identify risks and vulnerabilities in election systems without having to deploy teams into local election offices, interrupting both their time and people. This scalability is critical because while our initial efforts in 2018 were primarily targeted at state election officials, we recognize the need to increase our support to counties and municipalities who operate elections as well. Our Last Mile initiative seeks to provide information customized to local county election officials. This initiative provides no-cost tailored information on cyber risks and a checklist of cybersecurity action items specific to them. The final area of focus has been on building enduring partnerships towards collective defense. It may seem mundane, but governance, communications, coordination, training, and planning are critical foundational elements of our efforts to secure the nation's elections. We are clear-eyed that the threat to our democratic institutions remain, and we must continue to press for increased security and resilience of our election systems. For the 2020 election cycle, CISA has built off the lessons learned from 2018, and we're working to prioritize the following lines of effort. 1, CISA is focused on expanding engagement at the local level. We continue to work with election officials to improve both their and our understanding of risk to election systems. For instance, in June of this year, we did our second annual tabletop vote exercise where 47 states, thousands of local officials, private sector, and the federal government worked together to work through scenarios, share information, and understand how we'd respond collectively to threats to our election infrastructure. 2, CISA has expanded our level of engagement and sharing of best cybersecurity practices with political organizations, including the DNC and RNC. CISA recently joined the FBI and ODNI in offering briefings to presidential campaigns registered with the FEC and is engaged directly with presidential campaigns to offer services and share information. 3, CISA, in coordination with our interagency partners, is committed to helping Americans recognize and avoid foreign disinformation operations impacting our elections. Through innovative efforts like the War on Pineapple campaign, we educated on the tactics of foreign influence using a topic everyone can relate to, the divisive issue of pineapple on pizza. DHS is also working closely with the intelligence community to increase the quantity, quality, and timeliness of intelligence and analysis production at the unclassified level to help election officials and the public identify foreign influence information. We at CISA are committed to working with Congress to ensure our efforts cultivate a safer, more secure, and resilient election. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you, and I look forward to your questions today. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Sandvoss to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Steve Sandvoss, and I am the Executive Director of the Illinois State Board of Elections. I would like to thank Chairman Thompson, Vice Chairwoman Underwood, and Congressman Casten for giving me this opportunity to address you. As you are aware, in June of 2016, the Illinois State Board of Elections was the victim of a cyber attack during which hackers gained unauthorized access into the voter registration database maintained by the SBE. In response to this attack, measures were immediately undertaken to eliminate the vulnerability, assess the damage, and alert the victims and beef up our cyber defenses. Following all this, the SBE undertook an unprecedented effort to secure its voter registration database as well as other IT-related applications. Such effort was assisted with a grant from the Election Assistance Commission that provided $380 million to the states to assist in their cybersecurity efforts. Illinois' share was $13.2 million. Shortly after receiving this grant money, legislation was passed in Illinois that earmarked no less than half of the grant money to a Cyber Navigator program to be created and administered by the State Board of Elections. In order to receive any of the grant money, Illinois' election authorities, who conduct the elections in Illinois, were required to participate in the program. The Cyber Navigator program consists of three basic parts. The first part is the Illinois Century Network, which is a state-managed network delivering internet-type services to government agencies in Illinois. The goal of the network is to provide the election authorities with a cleaner and safer internet. Having this network under the complete control of the SBE and the Department of Innovation and Technology ensures that voter registration and electronic canvassing data never actually flow over the internet. Additionally, this gives us the ability to provide security measures and intrusion monitoring. The second part is the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Program, which the SBE is overseeing in partnership with the Statewide Terrorism and Intelligence Center. The program involves the research and gathering of information related to cyber attacks and cyber resiliency and sharing that information with all federal, state, and local stakeholders. Our goal is to consolidate numerous information sources and, with feedback from the election authorities, distill it into the most valuable, actionable information that's possible. The third part are the cyber navigators themselves. 9 cyber navigators are currently on contract to assist the election authorities by performing on-site risk assessments and providing resources to ensure election security for 2020 and beyond. The navigators will be offering additional services such as phishing assessments, penetration testing, and educational trainings. They will also be performing assessments on physical security and best practices in securing voting equipment. In addition to the Cyber Navigator program, the SBE has worked in partnership with the Illinois National Guard's cybersecurity team to provide cybersecurity protection for both the State Board and the election authorities during the 2018 general election. Members of the Guard were stationed in all regions of the state, at the SBE office, at the Statewide Terrorism Information Center, and at their own bases to be ready in the event of a cyber event. We are planning on partnering with the Guard to provide cyber protection and incident response for the upcoming 2020 election. Following the creation of the Cyber Navigator program, the SBE released $2.9 million of the aforementioned grant funds to the participating election authorities to upgrade election-related computer systems and to address cyber vulnerabilities identified by the Cyber Navigators. The funds can also be used to implement cybersecurity best practices for election systems and other activities designed to improve the security of the election systems. In addition to the Cyber Navigator program, the SBE took many steps to beef up its own internal cybersecurity, and these steps are described in greater detail in my written statement. Looking to the future, the SBE believes it is necessary to maintain the Cyber Navigator program indefinitely and possibly expand it to address the continuing needs of the election authorities. Cybersecurity is an ongoing, ever-escalating process that doesn't have an end date, and as such, there will be an ongoing need for funds to maintain the program. At present, the primary mission of the Cyber Navigators is to facilitate the Illinois Century Network connections between the SBE and the election authorities and to perform risk assessments of the IT systems of all the election authorities who are participating in the program to determine their adherence to the CIS controls. The first phase of risk assessments is complete, and the Cyber Navigators are currently reviewing each jurisdiction's vulnerabilities and are working with them to best utilize the security grant money to improve their cybersecurity posture. In addition to the Cyber Navigator program, the SBE is continually working on other ways to prepare for the upcoming election. We are assisting the election equipment and management vendors to improve their security posture. We have had discussions related to company ownership, personnel, cloud security, and processes for identifying cybersecurity risks, incident handling and recovery, testing, patching, and anomaly handling of hardware and software, and processes for handling the movement of data. Our staff continues to participate in tabletop exercises that simulate cyber instances that could occur during an election. We are working with emergency management officials to coordinate preparedness for the upcoming election cycle. And lastly, in conjunction with the Cyber Navigator program and our Election Operations Division, the SBE's Public Information Officer is developing a PR campaign to combat misinformation and disinformation, particularly in social media. I appreciate your time and consideration and will be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Ms. O'Connor to summarize her statement for 5 minutes.
Good morning. I am the proud Lake County Clerk and leader of a stellar team within our office which provides multiple services to its citizens. I do want to stop real quick and say thank you to the two gentlemen that have just spoken, because we use their services and we are grateful for their offerings. They are steadfast with their constant support, and we are very thankful in Lake County for both of you. Okay, continuing, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Lake County, Illinois. Lake County, Illinois protects the security and the reliability of our election infrastructure. We recognize the importance of using best practices, researching and acquiring modern election systems architecture, as well as collaborating with organizations dedicated to the guiding and providing us to the highest merit. Lake County has a population of 700,832, according to the U.S. Census Bureau Population Estimate Program 2018, and has, as of October 11th, 2019, 458,586 registered voters. There are 121 voting sites on the day of election and 18 early voting sites throughout the county. Lake County offers 3 voting options: vote by mail, early voting, and election day. Citizens may grace register to vote on early voting up to including election day. A snapshot of our election landscape is that we do have a network-connected system, but it is not connected to the internet. It is our voter registration system. We have an indirect connected system, which is our election management system with e-poll books. And we also have a non-digital elections component, which is our vote by mail process, which involves multi-steps. There are parts which are digital, such as online requests and signature verifications. Lake County participates in the Illinois Election Cyber Navigation Risk Assessments, which was used to identify and assess impacts of vulnerabilities on our network and election system. A common baseline risk assessment, as well as examining the inherent complexities of network connectivity, was conducted. The results were as follows. We are proud to say that the Lake County IT Department has already implemented many of the recommendations, and we are working now on implementing the others recommended. A common concern is the pairing of information between voter registration and election tabulation, as well as connectivity. Both systems are separate and not connected. Our voter registration system will soon be on the Illinois Century Network, ICN, which is a separate and private dedicated network for traffic between the Illinois State Board of Election and our voting registration system. Our election tabulation system, again, is not connected to the internet. Within our election systems and mitigating risk policies, we pride ourselves in being proactive and prepared for risks and threats. I would like to talk a little bit about the management systems within our cybersecurity profile. At the county level, we are very fortunate because we have an IT security officer along with a robust IT department that has already implemented many of the cybersecurity measures protecting the county network and the IT systems, including our e-poll books, our voter registration, and our election tabulation systems. At the state level, the Lake County's Clerk's Office joined the Illinois Election Cyber Navigators program and is working to implement recommendations from the risk assessment. At the national level, the Lake County Clerk's Office joined the Election Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center and the Multi-State Informational Sharing Analysis Center, and we are receiving regular advice and recommendations from these organizations. We are also adding an Albert sensor to our voter registration system, which is a monitoring tool that looks for malicious traffic on our network and alerts for CIS Security Operations Center, and it is a 24/7 analysis center that will investigate and provide resources to mitigate any issues on our network. Finally, the optical scan voting system, that we use leaves a secure paper trail and minimizes the risk against outside interference as no electronic votes are ever cast. All voting results can be accurately reproduced by reinserting the voted paper ballots through a ballot counter or a manual inspector. The threat of election interference, we believe, as all of us who are here, is constant and requires proactive monitoring. And to maintain always this election integrity, the Lake County Clerk and team values our citizens' confidence to keep their votes safe and secure.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Ms. Howard to summarize her statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson, Vice Chairwoman Underwood, and Congressman Karsten for the opportunity to testify today about the ongoing efforts to secure election systems in Illinois and across the country. Good morning. Election security has long been a priority for the Brennan Center, starting in 2005 when we convened the Voting System Security Task Force to conduct the nation's first systemic analysis of voting equipment vulnerabilities. Our work continues today, and in my role as counsel for the Democracy Program, I have the opportunity to partner directly with state and local election officials as they work to implement important election security measures, many of which we've supported for years. As you've heard this morning, the election systems in Illinois and across the country were targeted in 2016. And according to our national security and intelligence officials, will be targeted again in 2020. In fact, the director of DHS's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, has stated the big game, we think, for adversaries is probably 2020. While well-resourced hostile foreign nation states may be a new addition to the list of actors who pose a threat to our election infrastructure, the tools and tactics they use are not. Cybersecurity professionals are very familiar with these threats, including distributed denial of service attacks, hacking, and insider threats. Considering this, it's no surprise that there is widespread agreement on the appropriate countermeasures and policies that are needed to ensure our election systems can withstand attack. In short, we know what we need to do to harden our infrastructure, but we're lacking in leadership and funding. Illinois election officials are as acutely aware of the threats facing our election systems as anyone. The successful attacks on Illinois' voter registration database served as an unwelcome alarm to election officials everywhere, and Illinois' efforts, including their successes and struggles, are instructive when analyzing the current national election security landscape. In good news, election officials in Illinois and across the country have made significant progress in protecting our democracy since 2016. In Illinois, these efforts have included identifying and addressing vulnerabilities in the voter registration database and launching the Cyber Navigator program, which provides critical IT and cybersecurity support to local election officials. This program is an important component of Illinois' efforts to secure its systems and serves as a model to other states. Despite this progress, there is much to do in Illinois and across the country. First, in Illinois, most of the voting equipment is antiquated, and many of the machines do not use paper ballots. These machines need to be replaced immediately. Next, Illinois should implement robust post-election audits that serve as a check on the election outcome and answer the question, did the reported winner really win the election? Next, many Illinois counties use electronic poll books. These are laptops or tablets that poll workers use instead of paper lists to look up voters at the polls. There are no federal or state security guidelines for this equipment. Illinois should consider expanding its current voting system security certification process to include electronic poll books and adopting common sense contingency policies such as mandating paper backup lists at the polls. Of course, state and local election officials shouldn't be tasked with protecting our democracy alone. Congress has a very important role to play in the collective and comprehensive efforts to secure our infrastructure. In my written testimony, I offer a number of recommendations for congressional action. Among them, require voting system vendors to report cyber incidents. Next, make the critical infrastructure designation permanent to ensure election security remains a priority at DHS and election officials retain access to critical information and resources. And next, Congress should pay its fair share of the ongoing cost to protect our democracy. And this funding should include responsible accountability measures such as those that were included in the budget bill that the House passed in June. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I thank the witnesses for their testimony. I remind each member that he or she will have 5 minutes to question the panel. I now recognize myself for questions. Part of Ms. Howard's comments spoke to the varying degree of ability of certain communities to finance the machines necessary to conduct the elections. Mr. Sandoval, what has been your experience as to whether or not you've seen counties with the resources to do it on their own, to buy additional equipment?
Well, my experience has been that the counties in Illinois vary among the largest and most has the most resources and those who are small with very little. So I think there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to that, but I do think that the voting machines, as it was pointed out, being as antiquated as they are going to have to be replaced relatively soon, if for no other reason. Like any other piece of equipment, after a while it starts to break down, its life expectancy is coming to an end. And I think what we're facing right now is somewhat of when I say we, I mean the election authority community is facing a little bit of a dilemma in the fact that voting machine manufacturers, while they can modify their systems, the existing systems, they can use patchwork and whatnot to keep them secure, but we're all waiting for the voluntary voting system guidelines to be promulgated by the EAC. And the voting system manufacturers, my understanding is, are holding off on new development until they see those standards so they can manufacture the machines to those standards. And once those standards are enacted and the machines are starting to be produced, and then of course they have to be tested, that's when I think the resources is going to be more of an issue. And I think that's probably going to affect all the counties, because replacing the voting machines is not going to be cheap. And so once we're in a position to make a decision on purchasing those machines, then I think the big ask is going to take place. Now, if our legislature can foot some of that bill, that's great. Illinois, like probably many other states, is not in great economic shape. Hopefully we're getting better. But even so, I don't know if that's a reliable funding source for the amount of money that's going to take to replace all the voting machines.
Well, one of the challenges we have as members of Congress is we've been a partner with state and locals in some of that acquiring of new equipment. But one of the problems we run into is we need to have the standards, as you outlined, in place so that vendors won't run out and just sell equipment just because it's new equipment, but it needs to adhere to what we think the guidelines should be. Mr. Matheson, one of the concerns that we heard early on is whether or not the Russians or some of these other bad actors conducted mischief in our 2016 elections. What are you anticipating the potential for 2020 will be in the conduct of those elections?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the question. As I think Mr. Sandovas mentioned and Ms. Howard, we at CISA and Director Krebs have been clear that we view the threat to election security as ongoing, and that 2020 is absolutely a target for nation-state actors and others to explore vulnerabilities not just in the systems, but create disinformation campaigns in and around the elections process, which is why our focus isn't just on the cybersecurity side, although that's our primary focus in working with state and local officials, but also empowering state and local officials to talk to their voters about the security measures they've taken, the resiliency of the process, that ability to audit the process and manage risk to the systems so that voters can proceed with confidence. And this is where our decentralized system is really effective, because voters can engage directly with the folks that run the process in their community to ask the questions they have, to serve as poll workers, to watch pre-election testing of systems, and really to understand the steps that are being taken to secure the process. So from our perspective, the targeting of 2020 could come in the form of cyber operations or simply disinformation or a mixture, and we really want to provide the tools and skills for the state and local officials to respond.
Thank you. I have one additional question. Ms. O'Connor, you were quite clear about your system here in Lake County, and I compliment you for it. Do you see the need, either at the state or federal level, for additional resources that could be made available to you, or what resources do you see as a local person you think the federal or state government should provide to you as a local elected official?
I think most, to be honest, they provide us advice and services, but I come from a background in education, so I am a strong researcher and I believe in education. So I look to them for the newest methods, what's out there, how can they help us get there. So both the Illinois State Elections Advisors have been so important to us. Whenever we have a question, we turn to them, we ask them, they give us advice,
and
that
then
allows us
to research the best practice in the direction in which we're going.
Thank you. I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Caston.
Thank you so much, Chair Thompson. Thank you, Congresswoman Underwood, for allowing me to wave on to this committee, and thank you for doing this in Illinois. Given the hack that happened on our elections, I think it is critical for us to let people know that we are actively working to fix this, and thank you for having this out here. It strikes me that there's two ways. Democracy depends on people trusting that their elections represent the will of the people. And there's two ways that we can frustrate that. One is we can go in and physically modify votes. The other way is we can do some sort of targeted suppression of votes. And certainly in the pre-cyber era, I would submit to you that targeted suppression was much more prevalent. It's more cost effective, if you will, in terms of time and labor, whether through poll taxes or literacy tests or polling place location. My first question is for you, Mr. Masterson. In a cyber era, are you more concerned that hackers are going to come in and try to do more targeted suppression, or are you more concerned about physically altering individual votes?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Congressman. And from our perspective, as we analyze risk, we certainly recognize that there is risk to the voting systems, those systems that both the voter interacts with and votes on and tabulates. But at the same time, we haven't seen, and there's no intelligence to suggest the actual targeting of those systems or attempts to change votes. What we know is that adversaries are attempting to undermine our confidence in the democratic process, including by creating doubt around a person's ability to participate, right? And so we worked throughout 2018 and continue to work now to share information with state and local officials so that they can engage with their voters and on simple messaging. Understand, are you registered to vote before you head to the polls? Where are you registered? Where's your polling place? What's on your ballot? What can you expect to experience when you enter the voting booth, and engaging directly with those who run the process? Because the more voters know, the more attempts to discredit the process or to provide incorrect information to them. They have trusted sources of information at both the state and local level to combat that information, right? To go check the correct elections information and make sure that they're empowered to participate in the process. So it's twofold, right? We worry about the infrastructure, but we certainly engage actively with state and local election officials on countering messaging around the elections process. And again, driving those voters to trusted sources of information, your state and local officials, to validate the information you need to vote.
So I want to follow up with a second question, but I just want to make sure I understand. So do you think we are proportionally spending enough time on suppression as opposed to changing votes?
I think proportionally, we think about it as a hybrid threat, right? So there's concern about the infrastructure, certainly upgrading voting machines, having good, consistent post-election audits, which counters that initial risk concern that you've laid out, is critically important to us and prioritized. But equally important.
And I'm sorry, I just want to cut you off because
Yep.
I know that I'm
Yep,
running
I
out of time
apologize, sir.
momentarily. Mr. Sandvoss, as you think about the attack on Illinois' voter files in the last election, I can see how that could have led to voter suppression, especially if I can target those votes and if I can go in and modify, which thankfully we don't think happened. I have a hard time seeing how that would change votes. Should I be, in light of that, is it reasonable for us to be concerned about attacks on voter suppression in Illinois versus changing votes, since that seemed to be the big attack in 2016?
Yeah, I think from what happened in 2016, there was no evidence that votes were changed, which was certainly fortunate. Our registration system, I think there's some misunderstanding amongst the general population as reflected by some of the questions that we get, and that is that the registration system is completely apart from the vote tabulation system. So even if the bad actors were to have manipulated the voter registration data, it wouldn't have impacted the actual counting of the votes. So I think that point needed to be made.
But potentially it might have meant that when you showed up at your polling place, you weren't a registered voter.
Well,
Right.
here's one of the advantages of having a decentralized system is that each election authority has its own voter registration database, if you will, for their particular county. So if voters came in, even if ours was compromised, they're going to be using theirs to determine whether or not a person's registered to vote, and if they are, what precinct they'd be voting in. So unless a hacker were to get into their voter registration system and run amok, I don't think what happened to us would have impacted at the county level on election day. And our system was hacked back in June and into July, whereas the election was in November, so at least we had some time.
I think I'm out of time, so I will thank you and I'll yield back.
Well, we're a little kind with time this morning, since we're in Illinois. Yeah,
I'm sorry, and then the other part of your question was voter suppression and being concerned about that, or?
Yeah, really just asking for your thoughts of whether the attack on, at that higher level, there's the attack on the voting machine, which I think in the public's mind we think about, and then there's the higher level attack on the actual election files. And in my small brain, if I'm a hacker, that attack on the election files feels to me like something that could be a targeted suppression attempt, but doing that before an election, I have a hard time seeing how that would have led to a changing vote. So my question is really just whether you would agree with the conclusion in my small head.
I would agree that it would not, the targeted suppression or the resulting targeted suppression from the attack on the database, in my opinion, would just be more toward the system as a whole. In other words, if the voter registration system could be infiltrated by foreign actors, does that mean that the whole election could be manipulated by these same foreign actors? And I could see where that perception could be out there. And again, perception is reality. Even though we know that it couldn't have happened the way it was perceived that it could happen, because again, there's no direct link between our voter registration system and the tabulation of votes. But if people think that, elections is one big process inside a machine and that machine got hacked, they could say, heck, why should I bother voting? Because, if it's so easy to hack, then maybe my vote's not going to count. And that's where the danger is. And I think that's what the focus is going to be on in 2020 is, through education, as Ms. O'Connor pointed out, educating the voters by saying that, hey, you might hear stories of targeted attacks on a voter registration system, but that doesn't mean that your vote is not going to count. your vote is going to count. And that, I think, needs to be, impressed upon the general electorate so that they, don't lose confidence in the integrity of the election. I think that's what our big concern is.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize the vice chair of the full committee, the gentlewoman from Illinois, for as much time as she deemed necessary.
Oh, well, thank you, sir. I have lots of questions. Thank you so much. So I want to start with Ms. O'Connor. Thank you again for appearing on our panel today. I really appreciate your expertise and your work here in Lake County. In your opinion, do you believe that voters and our election infrastructure are well prepared here in Lake County ahead of 2020?
Absolutely. I truly believe that we are well prepared. I'm very confident. We want our voters to be confident in our system, and I believe that they are. Lake County moves forward in not only using all of the resources that are provided, we research to find out other avenues that we can learn and excel in, but also we are proactive in educating our voters. Our system, even within our office, when somebody calls our office, for example, they don't go into a waiting spot. They are streamlined through the office where the call is always answered by a live person, and their questions are answered. And this is very important to us because we believe that every question is important. And every time we answer somebody's question, we believe we have educated a family, a group, not just one. There are many factors of misinformation that are out there concerning elections. When I go speaking to different groups, I continually get similar questions, and my goal is to educate, our office's goal is to educate people with an understanding that what we are doing is correct, and they should be confident that their vote is going to count. Every vote is going to count.
Thank you. And so can you tell us a little bit about the Cyber Navigator program from your perspective? And specifically, if we were to make improvements of, if the federal government was going to scale up the program nationwide or authorize more money for states like Illinois to deploy locally, what improvements has that program enabled Lake County to make locally, and what improvements would you recommend to the program?
Absolutely. Again, like I said before, that we are very fortunate because our office is in the Lake County government building, so we also have the technology advancements and support from the IT experts within the Lake County building. But what we are receiving through our survey and how we are adapting to update our programs and move forward and advance is I consider it stellar, because I always like to look at our program as, this is a very general idea, but I like to put it in very layman's terms, because I know we always speak the language. An election is often very language motivated, but I like to say that often we are looked upon election as a castle. And in our area, we have the moat of our county building security, but then we have the dragons of the state and the national flying, and also supporting us and giving us additional means and ways to protect our vote and our office.
Thank you. Mr. Sandvoss, what benefits does the Cyber Navigator program offer the county election officials, specifically in those counties where they have limited budgets at that local level, which forces them to make difficult resource allocation decisions?
I think the benefits that the Cyber Navigator program or Cyber Navigators themselves provide to the election authorities is the introduction of a whole new way of thinking. And even those that have IT departments, I mean, I think prior to the Navigator program, even prior to 2016, were probably not focused as much on cybersecurity as they should have been, through no fault of their own. I mean, cybersecurity to us was, we had basic levels of security, but when it comes to what was really needed, there was nowhere near enough. So I think what the Navigators are doing is providing that education to the local jurisdictions, and the ones that have more limited resources, which is to say they have no IT department at all, I think they are the ones that are providing probably the most benefit to, well, I'll say the election authority community, because, you know, the ones that are the most vulnerable, it goes back to the chain being as strong as its weakest link. And I think what they're doing is they're introducing them to the local election authorities, you know, basic concepts of security, but then, you know, taking it through step by step by analyzing what is going to be needed in order to be as secure as they possibly can be. And I think that's probably the primary benefit that they provide.
And what proportion of the 108 jurisdictions, local election jurisdictions, would you say don't have that baseline IT capacity or cybersecurity capacity?
Yeah, to be quite honest, I can't give you a percentage because I just don't know. But, you know, anecdotally speaking from, you know, some of the hearings that we've conducted over the past couple of years, I think maybe 2/3.
Really?
Yeah. And when I say that, I mean don't have full-time IT divisions. They may have through their vendor, they probably have a person on contract that can go in and perform IT services. So I guess in that respect, you could say everybody has at least one person that they can rely on. But if you're talking about an actual IT department with full-time employees, I mean, that would be my guess.
Okay.
I mean, I could certainly find out and get back to you on that.
Mr. Masterson, did you have anything to add on that in terms of proportions in our state or across the country?
Yeah, so I don't, again, anecdotally, I don't have specific numbers, but it is not uncommon for many counties' IT departments to have to support more than just the elections department if there is even a dedicated IT professional for the county. In some counties across the country, it's actually contracted out to private sector vendors as well. And to your question, ma'am, if I may, on the cyber navigators, that hands-on keyboard, both risk analysis and support, is really critical. We know the steps that need to be taken to harden our systems, network segmentation, two-factor authentication, all of those controls. It's a question of how do we get that support, and I think what Illinois has done here is innovative and really helpful to those counties.
Thank you. Back to Mr. Sandoz. Have there been any challenges deploying the cyber navigators to all 4 of the geographical election authority zones in Illinois?
I think that the biggest challenge was probably selecting the right people to be the navigators, because at first you think of cyber and you think of, you know, you want people who are well versed in IT and all the jargon and all the software and the hardware and whatnot, which of course is very important. But since you are basically selling a concept to the election authorities, you needed to pick people that had not only the technical skills, but the people skills. The ones that can go into a jurisdiction and not blind them with science, but rather approach them in layman's terms, saying, okay, first of all, I'm here to help. Second of all, you know, may I take a look at your systems? In other words, approach it from a standpoint of mutual respect as opposed to just giving orders from on high. And I think that was probably the biggest challenge. But the second probably biggest challenge is, again, convincing all the jurisdictions that this is something that you have to take seriously, and that even though cybersecurity is up to now has been a remote or a foreign concept, it can't be thought of anymore like that, because again, you don't want to be that county on election day that the system collapses because you didn't do everything that you could have done. And I think that was probably
Gentlelady Hill.
Yes, sir.
One of the challenges we have is building the talent locally, so those jurisdictions can do exactly what you're talking about. The challenge more so is the over-reliance on vendors versus the capacity. So what happens is if Lake County didn't possess the resources and talent internally, they'd have to rely on an outside vendor, and that vendor may or may not be what you need. But what we're grappling with in Washington is how do we come up with some standards that we all can agree that every election system should have in order to be verifiable. And so the public policy issue for us is not to say vendor X, Y, or Z, but we should say an election system, in order to be verifiable, must have 1, 2, 3. And that's That's where we are, because we want to make sure that our system of electing our leaders is as honest and accurate as possible. And so, to some degree, we put money out to states and locals as a carrot for coming and doing that. But again, it's a partnership from the federal, state, and local level. And I think Ms. Howard written testimony said it will cost us about $2 billion to replace the machines around. That's a lot of money. Now, Illinois might be the exception, but I want you to kind of talk a little bit about how you came up with this $2 billion amount as a cost.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our $2.2 billion estimate is the cost for 4 of the highest priority election security measures that we've identified. So that includes approximately $750 million to replace the antiquated and paperless voting machines across the country. And I think Mr. Dietrich at the Illinois State Board estimated that the cost to replace the antiquated equipment here in Illinois would be approximately $175 million. Our $2.2 billion estimate also includes $100 million for audits over the next 5 years, approximately $500 million for voter registration, infrastructure, and cybersecurity improvements, and approximately $830 million to deploy, in essence, the Cyber Navigator program that you have here in Illinois across the rest of the country.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. So my next question is for Ms. Howard. In the report that you co-authored, you mentioned 2 underfunded election security projects in Illinois, the adoption of countermeasures for security vulnerabilities identified through the risk and vulnerability assessments, and legacy voting system replacement, which we talked about a few times here. Can you expand on your research, and do you have any specific recommendations as to how Illinois can address those needs?
I think, as you mentioned, in Illinois, the 2 unfunded election security projects that we identified in working with state and local election officials were, deploying additional countermeasures based on the findings of the local cyber navigators and to replace the legacy voting equipment. So these priorities are exceptionally important for a lot of reasons, and I think that, you can address these in Illinois promptly. And in Illinois, you have a decentralized system. So every county is going to be able to decide when and what type of equipment they're going to purchase when they purchase new equipment. And I understand that Cook County has recently moved forward with purchasing new equipment, and Macoupin County has recently decided to move forward and purchase new equipment. So it's moving forward on a county-by-county basis.
Thank you. And so the Senate Intelligence Committee has noted that election systems that use these optical scanners to review paper ballots are the least vulnerable to cyber attacks. And I understand from Ms. O'Connor that that's what Lake County uses as well. What vulnerabilities are associated with the use of electronic voting systems without the optical scanners? And then how many states, which you say nationwide, are using paperless voting machines in 2020?
Thank you for your question. As you've heard today, the auditability of a system is an integral component of making it a resilient system. And auditability is just a critical step that all of our systems need to have. When you use a direct recording electronic, a DRE, a paperless DRE system, you cannot conduct a robust post-election audit on that equipment. And so that's the concern that we're looking at. And right now, we estimate that in 2020, there will be 8 states that continue to use paperless voting equipment as their primary voting equipment in 1 or more counties. And those 8 states are Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, New Jersey, Tennessee, and Texas.
Thank you. How much funding would the federal government need for the full, that's the $750 million you said? And then of that 750 million, how much should Illinois get to make these changes that you've recommended?
So it's going to depend upon the vehicle that Congress uses to deploy these funds. So if it's based on whether or not the state needs to replace antiquated or is using equipment that's more than 10 years old, the total number is going to be a little bit different than if you used it through the current HAVA formula.
I see, but it would need to be robust funding.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So in preparation for this hearing, I asked our constituents in the Illinois 14th about their thoughts on what we should be doing to secure our elections. Within a matter of days, my office received 258 responses from people all over the 14th district. Election security is clearly at the forefront of people's minds here in district. So I want to use the remainder of my time to bring forward some of those constituent questions. The first is from Ryan from Oswego, Illinois, and this is to Mr. Masterson and Mr. Sandvoss. What steps are being taken to prevent this structured query language or SQL injection attack from occurring again? And for the folks here, it was that type of attack that the Russian operative used in 2016 to penetrate the State Board of Elections.
Well, the step that we took is we closed the portal in which the SQL injection entered into our system. It was a design flaw in the paperless online voter registration application system where the voter checks to see what their registration status is. And there was a window there that should have had a restriction on the number of characters, and for whatever reason that feature wasn't on there.
I see.
So we discovered what had happened pretty quickly and immediately corrected it. And I would say going forward, we conduct risk assessments and penetration testing, which basically bombards our system with different types of malware, including SQL, just to see if there's any other open windows, so to speak. And so far, we haven't found any. So and we still check on a regular basis just to make sure that's the steps we've taken.
That's great. And then Peter from Island Lake had a related question. Should there be a hard copy backup for all Illinois elections in case of hacking? And do we have an emergency response team in our state in case hacking is detected?
As far as the second part of the question, I would say we do have an emergency response team, and I think it's a cooperation effort between the State Board of Elections, the Statewide Terrorism Information Center, working with the DHS, as well as the National Guard. So I think that we would have personnel that are ready to go on a moment's notice responding to a cyber incident before, during, and right after the election.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question?
The hard copy backup of all elections.
Yeah, I mean, a hard copy could be produced. It probably would be a good idea to have. I guess the only problem with that is that now that we have grace period registration, same-day registration, that list would constantly be changing. So at what point do you print the list or have the backup? Because every day it could be different. Somebody could be off the rolls, on the rolls, and so you'd have a lot of supplemental lists. But I guess in general, if there was a major hacking incident and the whole registration, electronic part of it went down, having a paper backup would be useful.
Okay. Mr. Masterson?
Yeah, just very quickly, ma'am. Thank you for the question. Certainly, taking regular backups, both online and offline, understanding where those dependencies are is absolutely critical. And then having an incident response plan and exercising that plan, so implementing those backups and knowing they're going to work when you need them, is something we recommend and work with through tabletop exercises and other work with the state and locals, so that there's that plan in place and they can actively respond if something occurs to whether the voter registration list or other systems.
And did you want to mention the EI-SAC that could be maybe not the emergency response, but certainly does help states and municipalities?
Absolutely. So the EI-ISAC provides both information sharing and response. DHS-CISA provides incident responders both remotely, but also that can deploy and get operations back up and running to mitigate the impacts of a cyber attack. So we have any number of resources that we can bring to bear, and thank you for asking that.
Sure. Okay, so Paul from Naperville wants to know, is there any way to know if my personal voting information has been compromised?
Assuming he's referring to the 2016 database breach, he would have been notified. If there was enough information that we could determine a specific voter, we were required by law to notify that voter, and we did. And then we provided the voters who were affected with options or resources that they could use to determine whether or not the information was improperly used. To my knowledge, I don't think that anybody suffered any type of loss as a result of, like, economic loss as a result of the hack, or if they did, they haven't come forward to us and reported it.
So we haven't spent a lot of time here today talking about social media companies, the misinformation, disinformation. Congressman Caston raised it during his line of questioning earlier, and I think that that's an important piece of this. So I want to know from Ms. O'Connor, do you all have any kind of capacity to do anything online to combat that misinformation, or are you more relying on people, if they have a question, to proactively reach out to your office?
We are very involved in social media from our office. So we're always delivering, correct information. We have, Facebook page, the modern social media aspects that they don't have. So, again, our office believes educating. And if somebody asks a question on our Facebook page, we will correct them. So in that respect, yes, we are involved in social media.
Okay.
And yes, we're active in correcting and educating our constituents.
Awesome. Do you all have recommendation for how people should flag misinformation or disinformation? Do you all receive it at the State Board of Elections, or is CISA doing anything in that respect?
I can start. So, yes, absolutely. We have direct lines of contact with all the major social media companies throughout 2018. State election officials and local election officials reported activity that we were able to pass on, not just to the platform that had the activity, but to all the platforms so they could look to see if it was cross-platform activity. We don't recommend any actions to take on the activity, but we're able to pass it on and say, here's activity that's been reported to us, here's the contact for the state or local election official reporting it. And I will say, when it comes to responding to disinformation around the elections process, so misleading on where to vote, when to vote, things like that, the social media companies took a very aggressive posture, have published policies about takedown processes regarding that kind of activity, and we were able to push that to them.
So Christina from Batavia wants to know, is there anything that citizens should watch for on social media that might be behind a button to report election?
I mean, obviously, if you see something that says, oh, election day's been canceled, voting will start, a week from today or something like that, if it raises a red flag, if it doesn't make sense, if it just seems not right, we're going to encourage people to report it. If you see something, say something. So it's those types of things that...
Report it to you or report it to the platform?
Well, right now, I think we're trying to decide how we're going to do that.
I see it.
Yeah, we haven't solidified that yet. But I think the idea will be to communicate it probably to us, then we would distribute it to our partners, and then it would it would eventually make its way to whatever social media company it originated from to get it corrected. So it's examples like that we're going to try to, to put out or include in our, PR campaign, if you will. This trusted source, and first of all, trust the specific county clerk or the Board of Election Commissioners or the State Board of Elections. So if you see something that doesn't, purport to be from an official government agency, question it. And then second, like I said, if it just doesn't smell right, say something. Even if you're wrong, doesn't matter. At least it's communicated and you're being vigilant. So we'll put out basic things like, no, there's no internet voting. So any website that purports to say, vote over the internet, ignore it. It's wrong.
Right.
Voting, election day is, November 6th or 5th or whatever day it is. If you get a post that says election day has been postponed, or Democrats vote on Tuesday and Republicans vote on Wednesday, things that just don't make sense. Please, alert us to that, and we can get that taken care of.
One of the students who's here had a question. It's JR, I don't know which one's JR. Do you think that it's going to be a recurring problem of other countries interfering with United States presidential elections as well as distributing propaganda on social media? And so we talked about how the cybersecurity piece we knew was going to be a recurring threat, but just to put a pin in it, do we think that this social media disinformation will also be a recurring theme for 2020 and beyond?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the attempts by adversaries to undermine confidence in our democratic institutions as a whole is an ongoing and robust effort from a variety of adversaries. So absolutely, we view 2020 as a prime target for that, as well as other democratic institutions.
Awesome. Well, I can't stress enough the importance of today's hearing and the educational benefit that it's provided to our committee and to the public. As I've said before, the election's around the corner, less than 6 months until the primary, and we have to seize on every opportunity to have meaningful conversations like this one. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Caston has some additional questions.
Thank you. So I want to follow on pick up some of what I was asking before about the sort of targeted suppression angle in addition to changing votes. And I am not a IT expert by any stretch, but I spent 16 years as the CEO of energy companies, first as a manufacturer of power generation equipment and then running utilities. And a part of our job was to figure out where the vulnerabilities were and close those doors, which is why I'm at least personally hypersensitive to this issue. There's one question of how you suppress votes. There's a separate question of how you target them. And having recently won my first ever election, it struck me that a campaign office is a beautiful place to hack into their election system, because you've got tens, hundreds, in Congresswoman Underwoman Wood's case and I, thousands of volunteers showing up in uncontrolled offices, papers all over the place, and doing something that by its nature is partisan, which means that sometimes getting national support is a little less than it should be. Mr. Masterson or Ms. Howard, I wonder if you have thoughts on, are we doing enough to secure the voter data on the campaign side of what we do up on this side of the dais? And if not, what can we do more at a national level so that all that doesn't fall on campaigns or political parties to provide that protection? Because if I have that data, I know exactly who to target.
I think Matt may be better to answer this because they work directly with campaigns and candidates.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and we have been working with DNC and RNC and campaign committees, as well as individual campaigns, and both outreach with information sharing and the same support and services that we offer for free to state and local election officials are available to these campaigns, all with the goal of managing risk to their infrastructure. And specifically to voter data, a big part of the voter registration data is publicly available already, right? That's how campaigns get a lot of it. And so it's understanding what additional data is there and how they can secure that data, working with vendors primarily, right? So understanding the third-party risk and then managing that human element is a huge part of managing campaign risk, right? So you hit it on it directly, Congressman, and that is that there's volunteers, pop-up employment opportunities throughout campaigns. And so how do we build up resilience in the people engaging in the campaign work through phishing campaign assessments, through targeted education campaigns? And so we've worked very closely with the campaigns to try to raise that awareness. We created a very simple election campaign security checklist that we worked with both DNC and RNC on, and then pushed it out through their channels in order to just give the simple steps that whether you're a volunteer or the candidate yourself that you can take to manage the risk to your systems, personal devices and otherwise, to protect that data that you house, whether it's voter data or just important campaign communications, right?
My sense is my experience is that was more an opt-in than an opt-out program, right? Because you still have volunteers showing up with their own computers. You know, by design, you're not using a government computer that's been government secured for those. And, you know, I think, you know, we certainly tried to do a lot on our end, but it felt like a hole to me. Is there a way to make that an opt-out program?
So that all of our services, all of our support are voluntary, and so it's really a question of how we can best engage with the campaigns to either get that information out or those support and services. I will say that both the RNC and DNC, in working with them, have taken a lot of actions, a lot of engagement opportunities with their campaigns and others to build that awareness. But it is a big challenge for many campaigns, and candidly, it starts with the candidate. When the candidate prioritizes cybersecurity in a campaign, the rest of the campaign prioritizes.
Ms. Howard?
Thank you, and I would just add that the Federal Election Commission has been working with nonprofit organizations on options to provide cyber assistance to campaigns free of charge. But as you know, there's no quorum currently at the FEC, so this is a problem.
So I want to touch on something that Congresswoman Underwood raised. The social media question to me is less about, does somebody say something that is false on social media, or do they get bad information, as much as does that information then atomize and go out. So what Russia did in the U.S. in 2016 was not substantively different by scale, but it wasn't substantively different than what they did in Estonia or in Georgia or even in their own country. They create social media campaigns to establish that voters cannot trust their institutions, and at that point the institutions are weakened because that's Russia's national agenda. That's a hard gene to put back in the bottle in a very atomized media environment, but my question really for all of you is that we as public officials have a duty to make sure that our election systems are as robust and protected as possible. We also have a bully pulpit, and if we exaggerate this fear beyond a reasonable level, the risk is that people might say, well, look, all of these members of Congress were up there saying you can't trust your election system, in which case the Russians have exactly what they want. So you four who are experts in this, how would you like to see us as public officials talking about this issue in a way that is both responsible and focused on closing barn doors where they're open, but doesn't in any way overstoke the fear beyond what's reasonable?
Well, I'll speak from my experience, and granted, this isn't coming from elected members of Congress. This is coming more from the DHS, but it's certainly appreciated is the communication of the threats that are out there, so that we know what's to expect, and then we at the state level can decide how we want to present that to our general public. And I agree, it's a fine line between you want to project an aura of confidence, because I get this question all the time, how confident are you in the security of the elections leading up to 2020? And I want to say that I'm confident, but I don't want to sound like I'm overconfident, because then I know that systems can get hacked into, and I know that foreign actors can engage in misinformation that could be successful. So to make a prediction that I know might not come true would be kind of silly. By the same token, you want to project an attitude of confidence that at least, hey, we're doing everything we can to make the election secure. We think they will be secure. Your vote, we think, will count. Or maybe not say think, but we know it will count. And then just put people's minds at ease. I mean, obviously there's a threat. Everybody knows it, but try to put their minds at ease. And to me, it's no different than anything else one might do. I mean, are you going to not go outside because you risk getting hit by a car, or not fly because you think your plane's going to go down? People still live their lives, and I think with voting it should be the same way. That there's risks. Something could happen. It might result in a line. It might result in me having to cast a provisional ballot. But ultimately, at the end of the day, my vote's going to count. And I think that's the message we want to send.
I'm just going to comment that we work really hard to develop a trust, and that to us is significant. And we inform our citizens when we go to conferences, when we go to workshops. For example, the Illinois workshop for clerks, we talked about at that workshop how we have a backup plan. We talk about our assessments. We are educated on what we should do next. But we also look at each other as a community of Illinois clerks. or as a community of clerks nationwide. And I think that's important because we communicate our ideas, for example, I will get calls from other clerks saying, you know, what are you doing for this? How are you sending that information? Can you share it? We are a community of clerks within the state of Illinois, and I think that's very crucial because as we move forward in that, you are not only developing trust, but you're also developing a huge network of support.
I would say that I agree that they're two distinct issues, right? Attacks on our infrastructure versus disinformation and trying to suppress the vote, but I think that they are linked. Part of what they do with their disinformation campaigns is to exploit the concerns that people have about our infrastructure, and investing in our infrastructure to strengthen it and to inform the public, right, that it can withstand attack is a very important piece of this. And kind of, you know, looking back, I think Illinois election officials have really been pioneers in discussing this issue in an open and frank manner, and have really helped election officials across the country figure out what is going to work for them as far as, right, striking the right balance between being honest and forthcoming about what's going on, right, but still ensuring that people have confidence in their voting system.
Just quickly, sir, I really appreciate your question. I think Americans, most Americans, have been impacted by cyber incidents, right? So they recognize there are vulnerabilities in systems. So having an open discussion about what vulnerabilities may exist, what steps the folks at this table are taking to address those vulnerabilities, what more could be done to improve the resilience of the process, all of us should be engaging voters in those conversations so that they can understand. They're not going to believe if you say everything's fine because they've been impacted by incidents like that. And then talking very candidly between members of Congress and election officials. That's why I appreciate this hearing so much, so that you can understand how they view the risks, how they talk about the challenges to the process and have built resilience, whether it's through auditing, through a provisional balloting process, and then engaging your constituents in what steps they can take. Because it really is, as the chairman said, it's a whole of government, but it's a whole of nation response. And voters have the ability to ensure that their registration information is up to date and correct, that they know their polling place, what's going to be on the ballot, that they know they have a right to a provisional ballot, such that if there is a problem at the polls, they can still cast a vote and know and actually get the information from the state that their vote was counted as cast, is critically important. And so I think an honest discussion about both the risks in the process, the vulnerabilities, but also the steps that have been taken and continue to need to be taken is really critical as we move forward.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Yield, an additional question to the young lady from
During the
Illinois.
conversation, thank you, Mr. Chairman, it dawned on me that we did not talk about the results, the notification of the findings, and making sure that there is trust that those findings are correct. Have you all identified any vulnerabilities within the state of Illinois' reporting systems or across the country? And if anybody could just characterize any steps that are taken to ensure that not just the votes are counted, but as they're reported on election night, the American public can trust those findings to be correct.
Thank you for the question. I think your question goes to, again, the auditability of the system. So right now, we have 24 states, we estimate in 2020 that will conduct post-election audits before certification using the paper ballots, right? Again, to go back to your question of confirming that the winner actually did win the election, we think while Illinois conducts what's called a traditional post-election audit, where they look at a predetermined percentage of votes cast in particular polling locations, that there is a better method. We think the risk-limiting audit would answer the questions that you have and that lots of other voters have, and that it's something that you know, we hope to work with Illinois election officials on in the future.
Thank you. Thank you all. I
Thank
yield
you.
back, Mr. Chairman.
Well, let me thank our witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. But I can say from the witness testimony, so far as Illinois is concerned, and Lake County specifically, you're headed absolutely in the right direction. From our vantage point in Washington, you are doing exactly the kind of work that we envision the rest of the country should do. And we encourage that. We go back to Washington this afternoon with a new sense of hope that the investment we put in under the HAVA last payment, we can hopefully get new money into the system to give greater capacity to state and locals toward improving their system of elections. So, hearing no further business, the committee stands adjourned.